The Bill of Rights once contained 2 amendments that were proposed and then forgotten. One of them came a single vote away from transforming our country, and the other lay dormant for more than 200 years before coming back from the dead. This is the story of the first forgotten amendments, their death, and the rebirth of one of them. It's 1787. Anti-federalists are seething over the unlimited powers of the new Congress. Several states are refusing to accept the new Constitution unless more limits are placed on the federal government. An agreement was finally reached, and the first Congress sent 12 amendments to the 13 states for ratification. 10 of these proposed amendments became the Bill of Rights in 1791, but 2 proposals were slowly forgotten. Since these proposals had no time limit, they could be brought back from the dead. Foreshadowing! But this is what they did. Article the First, more commonly called the Congressional Apportionment Amendment, gave an exact formula by which the number of representatives in the House of Representatives was to be determined. It balanced the size and number of districts until there were 50,000 people per representative, at which point new seats would be added to the House to ensure the number is never exceeded. In other words, the amendment ensures each representative has about 50,000 voters. The system is somewhat complicated, which was reflected in the length of the amendment. But since it was never ratified, Congress instead simply passed laws determining the number of seats, which were then apportioned among the many states according to the census. Today, there are 435 congressional districts across the country, with each district having far more than 50,000 residents. But if this amendment had been adopted, the House would house an unbelievable 6,629 representatives, more than 15 times its current size, and more than double the size of China's National People's Congress, the largest legislative body in the world. Meanwhile, the Senate would remain the same size, meaning for every senator, instead of being 4.3 representatives like in our world, there would be 66.3. But without a limit on the size of the House, the number of seats would keep rising, climbing by perhaps dozens every decade. And this amendment nearly passed. On 2 separate occasions, it was a single state away from ratification. In Connecticut in particular, it was actually passed by the state House before being struck down by the state Senate. That's how close this amendment was from becoming reality. But since Kentucky's ratification in 1792, no state has taken action on the amendment, and though it could still technically be ratified, it lacks the support to do so, which is probably a blessing, given how unwieldy the House would have become. If you think corporate power is too strong in DC now, imagine how important money would be when everyone's voice matters so little. But the founders thought of this, and wrote a special amendment to address the corruption that money causes. Article the Second, which was often called the Congressional Pay Amendment, is a very simple one, unlike the last one. It simply says that any increase in salary to any member of Congress must not take effect until after an election has been held. Now, I say it was called the Congressional Pay Amendment because it's now called the 27th Amendment. Woohoo! Yep, that's right. The second amendment ever proposed became the last one to be ratified. This amendment's comeback stumped constitutional scholars and was led by the last person you'd expect. Much like the previous amendment, this one simply failed to garner the required support early in its life. In fact, it totally floundered, gaining barely half the required ratifications by the time the Bill of Rights became law. But this amendment had an advantage which the other lacked. It touched an emotional issue. This is what Gregory Watson, a student at the University of Texas, realized when he rediscovered the forgotten amendment in 1982. He wrote a paper on it for a political science class, arguing that the dormant amendment could still be ratified since Congress had given no time limit for it. His teacher thought his paper was unremarkable and gave it a C. Annoyed at the grade and curious about his discovery, Gregory continued his research away from school and discovered that the amendment had been rediscovered before. Ohio ratified the amendment in 1873 to protest Congress's Salary Grab Act, which was, as the name implies, a gigantic cash grab. They remained the only state to ratify it in the 1800s, but more than 100 years later, in 1978, Wyoming ratified it in a similar act of protest to a different congressional salary raise. Despite slow progress, momentum could never build, and after both ratifications, the amendment slipped quietly back into history, until Gregory's discovery. With his newfound knowledge, Gregory decided to prove his professor wrong and embarked on a national letter-writing campaign. He had no help and initially financed his campaign all by himself, which aimed to pass the amendment at last. He penned letter after letter, built strategies on which states to target, and never gave up despite spending thousands of his own dollars. In 1983, a breakthrough came. Maine became the 10th state to ratify the amendment, entirely due to Gregory's efforts. Colorado followed in 1984. By the end of the decade, 33 states had ratified the amendment, up from 8 when Gregory picked up his project. States which had rejected the amendment in the days of George Washington were reversing their votes. The success of his campaign was assured, but when asked years later why he did it, Gregory said that he simply thought it was a good amendment which was good for the country. As the amendment neared the required 38 ratifications to become law, national figures endorsed Gregory's effort, ensuring its success. When it became clear that nothing could stop Gregory's work, there was a frenzy to claim the honor of being the last ratifier to the last amendment to the Constitution. In May of 1992, a flurry of states took their chance, with Alabama ultimately claiming the final prize. The excitement continued for some days after Alabama's vote, and by the end of the month, the tally reached 41 ratifications, more than enough to pass the amendment. The excitement was so great, in fact, that 2 states, North Carolina and Kentucky, actually ratified the amendment twice. On May 20th, the House and Senate voted to recognize the new amendment, bringing Gregory's epic 10-year quest to a successful end. Today, Gregory is the only person in history who can claim that he single-handedly amended the Constitution. And if amendments can be brought back from the dead by college students just trying their best, then that means that we can make a change too. And that's what this channel's all about. It's about regular people making a change. And that's what my nonprofit does too. Here's our flag. But if you want to support our mission, our Instagram, our Patreon will be linked in the description. And we need more help. You know, we're growing rapidly, but there's always room for more people, for more believers, for people who want a new way. So, like the video, subscribe, support our mission. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.